the Germans are not smiling anymore because of the disastrous changes which they made in their energy policy. First of all, they became more and more reliant on Russia for gas, and were quite nonchalant about that. In fact, I think that the Chancellor at that stage saw that as a positive step, bringing the two countries together and having greater trade relations. And of course, this was all linked to their policy on climate change and net zero, where they were wanting to move towards greener energy. And of course, we now see the situation where they've closed down most of their nuclear power stations, where they're relying on other countries which produce power from nuclear, and where they're now in a situation where they're being held hostage by Russia. And indeed, at the time when Donald Trump was giving the warnings, other people were pointing out that given the autocratic nature of Russia, what the Germans were really doing was giving a whip hand to a dictator who would abuse that. And I suspect that their energy policy, their short-sighted energy policy, has actually contributed to Putin's ability and willingness to invade the Ukraine. The Ukrainians are suffering as well as the German population because of the mistakes that were made.
Whenever I've had the privilege to interview a Ukrainian member of parliament on this show, they've always pointed to the billions of euros that particularly Western European countries are sending continually to the Kremlin, funding that war in Ukraine through Nord Stream 1. And thank goodness Nord Stream 2 never came on stream, even though the Germans were initially in favour of it. I wonder, what lessons should we take from the monumental failures here, particularly of Western European energy policy over the last 2 decades?
Well, I think that the lesson that we should learn in the United Kingdom is not to make the same mistakes as the Germans have made. And that's why I'm glad that Liz Truss is now saying that she's going to introduce policies which will make us less dependent upon outside producers of gas, for example, and oil, by giving new licenses for drilling in the North Sea, for looking at fracking. Don't forget, we've got 150 years supply of gas in our own country, in the north of England, a natural resource which will be transforming to that part of the United Kingdom and also give us energy security. And I hope that we will learn from the lessons of the Germans and the lessons of Europe, that whether those autocratic regimes are in the Middle East or whether they're in Russia, that we should not become reliant on those regimes, especially when we've got resources of our own. And therefore, we have to have the kind of fiscal initiatives, policy initiatives, which will encourage energy self-sufficiency. That's what our all-party group in the House of Commons is looking at continually. How do we make ourselves less dependent upon other countries for what is necessary? Yes. Cheap energy is necessary to drive economic growth and to give people the standard of living which they expect.